Dr. Z. I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in transgender care. Welcome to my channel and welcome to another one of my Monday Q&As. This is a place where I answer your specific and direct questions. So if you have a question that is specific and direct to your situation, please comment below or email me to info@drzphd. The email is an introduction of this video. Keep in mind that your questions are going to be answered in the order that they're received. So there is going to be delayed as the videos go up, meaning I can't just answer your question for the next Monday Q&A. I think that's something that a lot of people have not really realized when they emailed me their questions. Other than that, please do post your questions, because oftentimes, as we can see, something that you're thinking about is something that somebody else is thinking about. And your questions are very instrumental because they give rise to things people never even thought about before. For that reason, they're incredibly helpful. Having said that, I have selected 6 random questions for today in order that they came. And I have blocked out all of the names for the privacy reasons. So let's get going. Always there's a timestamp, so that way you can jump around and see depending on a topic that is of interest to you. First question for today. As a feminine presenting trans man, I would love to hear more about feminine trans men on this channel. It was part of the reason I thought I wasn't trans, and even became hyper feminine in college as a face of denial. I have fear about dressing very feminine while looking like a man when I go up. I fear being targeted by people, whether physically or mentally presenting as feminine men. So trans men who are feminine or hyper feminine in their gender presentation are very, very real, very much so. In fact, I did a video last month on difference between gender identity versus gender expression versus gender role, in which video I talked about how your gender expression, how you want to express yourself, doesn't necessarily have to be in alignment with your gender identity, such as your example here. You can identify as trans masculine or trans man. That's your core gender identity. Your then gender expression and presentation, how you express yourself to the world, in this case is feminine or even hyper feminine, or whichever way you like to classify it. Very, very valid. The issue with having a presentation, gender expression that is, I don't want to say in disalignment because that would be wrong, but that is different than your gender identity, causes exactly what you're experiencing, which is being targeted, whether physically or mentally, while you're presenting feminine man. And the reason why you're being targeted is because socially we're still very far behind to catch up on these nuances of how gender expression can be completely different and not in alignment with your gender core identity. And this is very, very important. For that reason, for you, while you're presenting as a trans man while being hyper feminine, for people, it gives a whole maggot of assumptions, all of which are most likely deeply inaccurate. Those assumptions can bring up issues in those individuals, can bring up issues of inner transphobia, can bring up issues of their own understanding of gender, and that will further lead to projections, externalized projections, which are going to be in a form of stigma or hate toward you. So it's very difficult. In my experience, individuals whose gender expression varies very drastically from their core gender identity are having just as challenging experience as individuals who identify as non-binary, because as non-binary person, there's still no social cues to what classifies as non-binary gender identity. For the same reason, for somebody who is trans feminine and their gender presentation is masculine, or trans masculine and their presentation is feminine, such as in your case, it can be very difficult socially, because every time you go out, the majority of society, unfortunately, are going to look at you and going to very quickly, even subconsciously, scan you automatically for little markers that were all inherited and learned as a process of kind of a process of just being part of the society. And those markers are going to quickly classify individuals into one or two categories, and that's going to be male or female. And for that reason, when things like this don't align in somebody's point of view, they struggle with it. So it's challenging. Having said that it's challenging, I also want to say that I think it's great that your gender expression, the way you see yourself, is not necessarily is fully parallels your gender core identity, and it doesn't have to be. And I really encourage for you to be yourself. I encourage for you to be yourself no matter what. Of course, safety, I always say, is a priority. Safety is a must. But it's important for all of us to realize, including for trans individuals too, because I see this in trans community where people make assumptions when they see somebody and somebody's presentation, they say, oh, that person is not working their gender transition, without even knowing what their gender transition goals are, without even knowing that maybe the way the person presents is their gender expression. And that's all there is to it. So it's challenging, but you know what? Maybe I will go ahead and make a whole video about it because it's such an important topic, and I'm glad that you brought it up because there is definitely, it's really, really important. Like I say in that video on gender expression versus gender identity versus gender role, all three of those don't have to be in alignment. A person can identify as a woman, have a gender expression that is masculine, and then have gender role that is feminine, and vice versa. Or, I mean, you name it. In terms of how those things can interplay can really vary depending on individual. And I think that's a great thing because that just shows the individuality embedded in all of us. So it's hard when you are, and it can, like you said, in college, you even went through the phases of denial because you were wondering, maybe I'm not transgender because look at my expression is so feminine, right? And that can add confusion to the mix. Again, square one, go back to how you feel about your gender assigned at birth. That's going to be square one in terms of your core gender identity. If you wanted to look at square two, then ask yourself, how do I want to show up in the world? What is my gender expression? What do I think of gender expression? How do I want to be seen? And sometimes the way you want to be seen doesn't have to be in alignment with your core gender identity. And maybe you want to be, in your case, you want to be seen as very feminine, as hyper feminine, while your core identity is masculine. And that's very, very legitimate. Great point. I don't even know if this is a question, but a great topic to discuss nonetheless. Thank you for asking. Question number 2. Hi, Dr. Z. I'm 18-year-old trans woman. I still live as a man for the most part, but dress femme to cope with dysphoria. I live away from my parents, but I'm still completely financially dependent on them. I see them once or twice a year. I want to go on hormones, but my parents are against that. I can afford hormones on my own, but I don't know if I should go on hormones and hide it from my parents. My main worry is that my parents will stop sponsoring my education, but more than that, I have a good relationship with my parents, but they get mad whenever I bring up issues regarding gender. And I still want to have a good relationship with them. I came out to them 18 months ago. Should I just wait for them to come around and medically transition only after that? Thank you for sharing the time to read my question. So this is first of all a very personal question, in a sense that this has to do with your relationship with your parents. And this is not necessarily something where I feel I can give you the most input, because it's your parents. You already expressed that you don't want to do something behind their back. Your relationship to them matters. Yet they already expressed resistance toward your gender identity. You worry they're going to cut you out financially. You're financially dependent on them. There's a lot of factors here for you to think about. I'm surely not in a position to tell you whether you should do things behind your parents' back, or whether you should start hormones, or whether you should wait until they get on board with it. What I do encourage for you to think about is, I encourage for you to think about yourself in a sense of what's happening with your dysphoria, how much distress are you feeling? Also, since relationship with your parents matters to you, how can you and your parents have a more broader discussion? How can perhaps there's the way to encourage for them to have a discussion about your gender identity? Would your parents be open if there was a therapy between you and parents and a gender therapist that can explain to your parents what's going on? Would your parents be open to something else? I think that in this message, as you shared, you care a lot about your parents. I can see it coming through. And I can see also a conflict for you here too, because you're saying I'm an adult. I can go ahead and start hormones if I want to, but I also don't want to jeopardize or create more tension or conflict in this relationship with my parents. That is for you to decide. This is not an easy case. You're not the only one in this position. Many people are in this position, whether it's with parents or with their partners, where they're in position that if they do step forward, a step A, step B is going to follow. When we are so interconnected to other factors and where our kind of contextual system is also so dependent on so many factors, it becomes a more challenging decision. And this is where it's for you to really figure out what is the best option. I'm definitely not going to cheerlead you into one way or another. I'm going to say that whether you decide to start hormones and upset your parents, valid. If you decide not to start hormones until your parents get on board, also valid. You have to do in this case what feels right to you, and only you know what feels right for you. And perhaps sometimes figuring out and knowing what feels right for you takes a little bit more time. So I wish you all the best, and I hope you find the resolution. But unfortunately, I can just give you a clear answer. And if I was working with you, I would do the exact same thing. I would encourage for you to think about all of those things. What does the next year looks like without hormones? How is it going to affect your dysphoria? What is also the next year looks like if your parents are going to cut you out financially? What is the next year is going to look like if your parents are going to push you away? I would encourage for you to consider all of those factors before making your decision. So I wish you all the best, and maybe somebody else can comment if they were in the same spot and give you a little bit more feedback. Question number 3. I have a discussion topic which might be interesting to many people. When talking to cis people, or when cis people talk about trans people, trans persons, almost inevitably the subject of surgery pops up, meaning bottom surgery. If I had admitted to myself earlier in life that I was trans, no doubt, I would have done it. And yet, as I'm living as a woman, and am in touch with other trans individuals, I notice that for me and some others, my face is a greater source of dysphoria than my genitals. In the end, it's our face, what we usually show to other people, not our genitals. Now, it's out of the question for economic reasons, but I guess I would rather choose feminizing surgery, facial surgery, than bottom surgery, and yet in public debate, this topic hardly comes up. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. I'm sorry if this has already been the subject of one of your videos. I haven't watched them all yet. It has not been subject of a video. It's a great question to bring up and to ask me for my thoughts on this issue. It is true that in most especially media and otherwise, for some reason, for a lot of cis individuals, it seems to be the crux of the question, right? To ask whether people had bottom surgery, as if in that way it's to some extent or another legitimizes or discredits an individual's gender identity. And I think this goes back to the view and to the notion that individuals who identify as transgender, formally characterized as transsexuals, are individuals who are not comfortable with their sex, and the whole point of transition is to go from one sex to the other opposite sex. And as we know, this notion is still true for a lot of people and does not really hold up for a lot of other individuals who identify as broader than just somebody that is fully incongruent with their sex and fully in alignment with the opposite sex. Gender, as we know, is broad and characterized much broader than that. I think part of the reasons also why people are constantly asking about bottom surgeries is because they're still carrying very strong binary views and still carrying strong views that gender equals sex and that sex anchors gender. I personally, working with a lot of adults, I have seen more adults who have decided to have facial feminization surgery first and having genital surgery later, or who have decided to not have genital surgery at all for various reasons, financial reasons, health reasons, reasons of sexual function, because they feel like they're more enjoying their sexual and intimate life with their genitals than if they had gender surgery. So there's a lot of reasons, and I think that public is yet to catch up to fully understanding dysphoria, to truly understanding how dysphoria affects individuals, to truly understanding that it is very common for people to have very strong facial dysphoria and have very minimal or non-existent genital dysphoria, that it doesn't have to be very black and white. It doesn't have to be transgender equals all of the surgeries so that now you're physically aligned with the opposite sex. And until public catches up to that, I think people are going to be asking this type of questions, which are incredibly invasive and very personal and private, and honestly, nobody's business. But you're not, definitely not an outlier in wanting facial surgery. Majority of people I worked with always first went for facial surgery for exactly reasons you said, because face is something that's visible and genitals is something that's not visible. And when people start social transition, it is the physical attributes that tend to give the most dysphoria than the attributes that one cannot see or cannot show to the world. In fact, it's very common to experience no genital dysphoria until you actually have more congruency, such as, facial congruency, but not otherwise. And then your dysphoria will shift to genitals, but not for everybody, but it does happen. So you're definitely not an outlier. I'm sorry to hear that you want to have facial surgery, but sounds like for financial reasons you're unable to get it. But it's not uncommon to want it more than a genital surgery. People just are going to have to catch up to really understanding dysphoria. And hopefully this is the point of this channel, is to share information so that even people who are not struggling with gender dysphoria can hear some of these videos and get a little bit of glimpse of understanding of how varied and dispersed dysphoria is. Great question. Question number 4. Can you clarify feminine trans men versus feminine non-binary? I love it. We have a lot of overlap between gender expression identity and gender core identity. So feminine trans men versus feminine non-binary people. This is how I would clarify it. Feminine trans men are individuals, like in the first case that we discussed. It's an individual that identifies that their core identity is men. Their gender identity is man. There are expressions and how they express themselves and how they embody that identity is feminine in nature. Feminine non-binary people, and I see where for some people confusion is, because people don't say, well, non-binary it's like both male and female. Not true. Non-binary is not really both male or female. Non-binary, really, one way that I like to look about it, and I actually have a great video on how to figure out if you're non-binary is your gender identity. Non-binary is a keyword here, is not exclusively male nor female. So whereas trans men are, in this case, would be more exclusive man, masculine, non-binary identities are not exclusively male nor female, so neither nor. In this case, feminine non-binary individual, in my experience, would be an individual whose, again, their core gender identity is not exclusively male or female, non-binary, but their whole presentation, how they present, is feminine in nature. I know that it's confusing because some people say, well, if you're feminine non-binary, then how can you even be non-binary? It doesn't just make you then a woman or trans-identified female, and that's not really the case. So that would be the key characteristics, is, again, we're looking at the core gender identity and then the prefixes that we have in front of that, in this case, feminine trans men and feminine non-binary people, is a way you embody them, the way you express that core gender identity. And without the prefixes, if we just say trans man, then perhaps their expression would be just more masculine in nature as well. So that's how I would clarify. Hopefully that clarifies. I know that there's nuances in language still, there's nuances in how we talk about things, there's nuances in how we understand things, and things still can be very confusing. So hopefully that clarifies. Great question. Question number 5. Dr. Z, I really need help. I've been thinking about detransitioning. I thought about growing my body hair out and being a guy while still on hormones, just to try it out, just to see who is the real me. I'm happy starting hormones. I'm happy starting hormones until I started going to my local LGBT club. I fell in love with a trans woman who turned out to be heteronormative. So if you fell in love with a trans woman that is attracted to um, men or trans masculine individuals, my community is small and varied, and every trans woman I have met in West Virginia has been heteronormative. I feel so different being attracted to other trans women while I'm transitioning. It makes me feel like I made a mistake. Also, they're so feminine. I'm more of a tomboy as a trans woman. I just need your advice. This has been troubling me for months. Um, I'm assuming what you're asking me is whether you should detransition in order to have a relationship with trans women, because what you're saying is that you are attracted to trans women, you identify as a trans woman, but where you live, most of the trans women where you live are not attracted to other women. Their sexual orientation is they're attracted to men, right? Or they're attracted to trans masculine people. And as a result of that, it limits or pretty much eliminates your possibility of having a relationship. And you're struggling with that. If this is what you're asking me, my answer would be that I don't think that a person should transition or detransition for reasons such as dating pool. Um, transition is transition is the steps individual takes to feel more aligned with their core identity, and the reason why they take the steps to transition is because they are experiencing incongruency that further causes some distress called gender dysphoria. The distress becomes unbearable or interferes with their life to the extent where people decide to transition to eliminate the distress, to feel a much more congruent and as a result, a happier life. People detransition also for numerous reasons. People detransition because they realize they made a mistake. People detransition because they realize their gender identity has shifted or has evolved, or perhaps is something else than what they thought it is. People detransition because they don't like any kind of perhaps side effect they're experiencing on hormones, or they don't like what happened to them as a process of having surgeries and how now they relate and feel toward their body. So people detransition also because there's stigma and lack of social support, and they're really struggling making it. Many reasons why people detransition. And I suppose as I'm talking about it, if you personally decide to detransition so that you can then be able to have a relationship as you assign gender at birth, which in your case is male, with trans women, I suppose that's your prerogative, I guess. What I'm trying to say is, first of all, my question to you would be this. One, wouldn't you still struggle with gender dysphoria? If the case is yes, wouldn't that interfere with your life, even though if you are going to be in a relationship with a trans woman? Two, are you going to be open also with a trans woman you're going to be in a relationship with that your identity is feminine, and that the reason why you did transition is because you wanted to have a relationship? Because eventually things are always still come up, right? And I also think if you are going to be in a relationship, I think it's only fair to disclose so that that person knows as well. So those would be things that I would want to ask you, and things that I would challenge you to think about. They're not easy things to think about, but there's things to think about. And I think it's that perhaps you're not the only one who will decide to consider the transition because you want to, in this case, have intimate relationship or long-term relationship. Some people detransition because they feel like life in their gender assigned at birth was easier. They wanted their privilege back. I can't judge that. This is very personal, challenging decisions one has to make. However, with your particular case, for you just to think about, that I challenge you to think about is, would you still have then gender dysphoria issues? how is it going to be for you living as your gender assigned at birth? Even if you are in a relationship, wouldn't that nag deep down inside of you? Those would be the questions that I would want you to sit with and to think about as you think about this issue. But yeah, it's not a very clear cut, not as very easy. I think either transition or detransition are both very serious matters, and you have to consider all of the factors going into them. So I wish you all the best. I hope you find the answer. And maybe somebody who is watching this can also chime in and comment and give you and offer you some feedback. Question number 6. Dear Dr. Z, I transitioned around 15 years ago. I struggled to connect with trans community early in my transition because I had a lot of internalized transphobia. Very common. Over the years, I've done a lot of work to address my internalized transphobia in therapy. Good for you. I would now like to have more friends in my life who share similar life experiences around gender and transition. However, I find that people I meet when I go to a local trans community events are at much earlier stages in their transitions compared to me. How do I meet other post-transition trans people? So first of all, kudos to you for taking the time, therapy or by yourself, to work through internalized transphobia. We all have internalized transphobia, myself included, given the society we live in. It's just the way it is. So it's our job and responsibility to work through constantly detoxing that internal shit inside of us. So good for you to do that work. So it sounds like as a result of this work, now you would like to connect to trans individuals. You feel like you would like to form this relationship, and you're struggling to find individuals who are kind of at your resonance, meaning they have completed their gender transition, whatever that may be for them. And I know that it's very frustrating. It's frustrating for anybody listening that is further along in transition or has completed again whatever your transition goals are, and you want to connect, and you go to a support group, or you go to your LGBTQ center, or you go to some other places or gathering where trans people get together, and you try to meet people who are at your stage in terms of where you're at, and you meet kind of like newbies, right? Kind of like rookies, people who are just starting out. People have a lot of questions. Hey, what are the best ways to get you hormones, or what is the best way to come out? All those things that you've already been through. So it becomes frustrating because you're ready to talk about other things. You're ready to talk about things related to now living life in your gender, navigating life in your gender. And so all those questions become very frustrating and challenging. So it can be really hard. It can be really hard to find trans people post-transition. I'll tell you why. One of the reasons why it's so hard to find them is because, in my experience, at least clients I work with, once they complete the transition, whatever gain that may be for them, I don't want to cluster transition as something that's very specific. People move on. They move on and they just live their lives. They move on from gender-related stuff. They move on from support groups. They move on from LGBTQ centers. Of course, there's those people who continue to stay there and be part of the community. But majorities of people, in my experience at least, they move on. And part of why they move on is because they have spent so much time focusing on their gender. Not only the transition period, but they also had so much of their past focusing on living and struggling with gender dysphoria that by the time they achieve congruency, whatever that is for them, they just want to, close the chapter. Of course, it doesn't mean that you're negating the fact that you have transgender history, but what I mean is that they just want to stop talking about gender. In fact, I recommend my clients with whom I work with, once they achieve their transition goals, I always tell them, now I want you to stop working with me. You don't need me anymore. I want you to now take a year off. I want you to, if you can, I want you to travel. I want you to decompress. I just want you to focus on the rest of your life. There's so much more to your life than gender. I want you to just really start focusing on other avenues of your life that you've been neglecting. I want you to stop thinking about transition, stop thinking about gender, and just start living your life as you. Because if we constantly look at the life through the lens of gender and transition and being, identifying as trans individuals, it can be very difficult for you, because then you start seeing a lot of things solely from that lens, and there's so much more to you than your trans identity. This is why it's so difficult for you to meet people, because probably can't speak. Probably the places where you go to, they're just not there. They're not there because there's no need for them. anymore to belong to this group. So I would recommend for you to also just start living your life. You probably just by living your life and just being energetically open to meeting trans people, you're probably going to run into trans people in your life. Probably you're going to find them just naturally, innately. Unfortunately, there's not going to be a group out there. Well, perhaps there is actually a group out there for like post-transition individuals. I'm not aware of that group. I would also recommend stay on social media in terms of things like Instagram or their followers that are openly transgender, that are, you can see they have completed the transition, that they're in new areas that you want to connect with, that you see that you have something in common. Reach out to them. That would be another option. But other than that, it's going to be challenging. Chances of you meeting somebody that is post their transitionary goals at LGBTQ groups is going to be rare, at least in my experiences. Certainly they are there, but in my experience, majority of the people I work with, they just stop attending it because they just don't, not only do they feel like they don't really need that support, but they feel like they can't resonate with people who attend those groups the way that you can't resonate. So it can be challenging, but just start navigating your life. Maybe by the way, another good option is start, if you would like to volunteer, or if you'd like to donate your time to any kind of centers or organizations that are doing advocacy work that you believe in, that is related to transgender individuals. That could be a great place to meet other people, because usually people who work there are people who are trans-identified themselves, people who most likely have also completed their transition goals. So that would be a great way to meet other folks. So that would be another thing that I can think about. But that's what comes to the top of my mind. If anybody else watching this have any ideas how somebody can meet individuals who are trans-identified post-transition, please chime in. Also leave a comment below. This is the crux of this channel, is that people are sharing resources, people are sharing information, people are sharing feedback. This is what I love about this channel. It's not just me sharing my thoughts and my perspective based on my experience in the field, but it's also all of your experiences. And don't forget, you are all experts in your own right in regards to your gender, and your feedback and your support also matters. So those are the questions for today. Really great questions, lots of interesting explorations, interesting discussions. Feel free to comment below and to leave your question below, or to email it to me at info@drzphd.com. The email is in the information bio. Comment below, let me know what your thoughts are on the questions, and I will see you all next time. Bye.